Hi, Merle Goldstein here. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about reparenting ourselves and healing from childhood wounds as well as inner child work. So a lot of us have unmet needs from childhood. Maybe they're needs for validation, for love, unconditional acceptance, healthy boundaries, compassion, not feeling guilty for taking care of ourselves. There are a lot of ways in which we get messages as children about things that we're all entitled to just for our mental health and as human beings, that maybe those things are not okay, or we should put other people's needs ahead of our own needs, that certain basic rights to privacy, to autonomy, to being our own person, to having a self, to asking for needs to be met, being needy, seeking comfort in relationships, expressing emotions, all these natural things that we all have a right to as human beings. Sometimes we get taught that it's really not okay to seek out those things or to fully express ourselves. And we learn to suppress or inhibit our needs, our emotions, our feelings, basically anything that our attachment figures or caregivers or society teaches us are not acceptable to others. We may learn to suppress inside ourselves, or at least to not express those parts of ourselves, to inhibit their expression. So maybe deep down we have a secret world of, a fantasy world, or from books we read of loving caregivers or someone who will come rescue us or being taken care of, or we vicariously feel our feelings through things we read or watch in movies or something like that. But we don't really express those things in real life to the people around us if we've learned that they won't accept us if we are authentic and open, genuine, and honest. So what ends up happening is that um, these needs that are not met, we pay a price for not having them be met. And sometimes it's not things that we do that get criticized or shut down, but it might be things that we just don't have access to, things we're deprived of, that are an absence in our lives, right? Maybe there are things that we need that we're not attended to, we're not paid attention to. Our physical needs are not met. People are not paying attention to our emotions, right? We might be invisible in relationships. So there could be also neglect that affects us as well. And what happens is these things really fester deep down inside of us. Either they build up into a frustration, a tension, a longing, fantasies, an inner world filled with wishes and wants and ideas or pictures of how one day, if we wait long enough, we'll get what we want. If we're good enough, we'll finally get what we want. If we do what other people want us to do and get approval from other people, then we'll finally feel happy, right? We may have all sorts of beliefs, illusions, fantasies, things that we tell ourselves in our minds that give us hope or give us comfort and help us survive. Or we may do a lot of work, a lot of active work, maybe unconscious, but still active, to try to keep our emotions or those unmet needs, those hurts inside from coming to the surface. So maybe we keep busy all the time, or we focus on the positive, or we tell ourselves, we minimize our emotional experiences. We tell ourselves, oh, that wasn't really a big deal. We brush things aside, right? We may do certain active things to push away or keep out our pain from coming up. And we do pay a price for this. Sometimes the price is worth it, especially if we don't have other options and it's helping us to function. But sometimes we get to a point where either our defenses are breaking down, we can't anymore cope with these losses inside of us, or these painful wounds that are not healed. Or we get to a point in our life where we actually just have the space and the time or the ability to look more inwards and start reflecting on things that are going on for us. So either we have the safety or the quiet or the ability, the resources to start looking inside and focusing more on those unhealed, painful pieces of ourselves. Or something happens that sort of upsets the apple cart and we have no choice but to try to address or deal with our childhood wounds. So there are a lot of different ways that people address childhood wounds, and some of these are sort of almost manualized into a treatment approach or a type of therapy. And there's a lot of talk about inner child work, inner parenting, internal family systems, which is where you bring um, a, a whole healing part of yourself, gives energy to other parts of the self that are more wounded or unhealed. There are a lot of approaches that involve more of an intrapersonal process, which is about your relationship to your own childhood parts, your relationship to parts of your own self, and how to heal these parts of you, versus an interpersonal process where in therapy you have more of a corrective emotional experience, where you maybe experience the therapy as an attachment relationship, the therapist as a caregiver, or the therapist as a transference figure. And in those situations, what we hope for is that the therapy and the relationship with the therapist will give the person some healing of their childhood pain. Now, I would say that either of these approaches and different things work for different people. I think some of it has to do with um, how good someone is at imaginal absorption or getting absorbed or involved with a vivid image in their mind, because sometimes when we have a very strong ability to imagine things or to visualize things, then we're able to feel as if we are reparenting ourselves in a way that's vivid enough that it's emotionally evocative and it feels like it meets some of that need. And I think for other people, they're not so able to get caught up in imagining giving themselves something or communicating with different parts of the self. And so the lack still feels like it's there, or it's more of an intellectualized process if they try to reparent themselves. And so they may need to experience concretely someone else actually helping them access some of their emotions and maybe meeting some of their needs for them. Now, either way that you go about it, there's going to be some grief as part of the process. First of all, if you have your needs met from another person, then there's going to be grief that, first of all, they weren't there before, that they're not there all the time, and that they can't actually fully heal what happened already because that's over and in the past. You can create new experiences, and sometimes those new experiences can get activated and override the activation of the old experiences. But you can't really erase or undo what has happened already in the past. So the way someone felt when they were 5 years old, if they re-experience that part of themselves as an adult and they feel like that part is being healed in some way, they're still not actually 5 years old and they're still not actually undoing the fact that what happened at age 5 happened. So there's always going to be some sort of lack or something missing, even if in the present, those parts of ourselves are being healed in some way or transformed in some way. But that still could be a very valuable piece of the process. If somebody is trying to reparent themselves, what's hard about that is that it's really not the same to give yourself something, right, that you really needed from another person. It's not really quite the same thing. It may feel better in a certain sense to feel like you have control over taking care of yourself. But by the same token, we don't meet our own needs the way that someone else can meet our needs. We're wired for social connection. We're wired to need other people. If a baby is sucking their thumb, they're not being nourished in the same way as if they're taking in milk from their mother, even if their thumb is convenient and under their control and it feels good, right? But it's not sustaining them the same way. So things that we give to ourselves, even though it feels like it's more under our own control and we feel more self-sufficient and less needy or dependent, doesn't really quite do the trick as being in a relationship. But relationships at the same time involve risk and the other person's needs and being disappointed and being vulnerable and sometimes being hurt. So there's really no perfect solution. There's no magic answer out there, but we all have our default ways of how we have coped with our pain or the lacks inside of us and the types of solutions that we seek based on our personality. So one of the things to kind of think about, which I always like to explain to people, is that the more flexible we are in terms of our range of responses to painful situations, the more adaptive we are, the more healthy we are, the more we can cope with different types of scenarios in a flexible way, right? Because depending on the context, what works in one situation really well may not work in another situation quite the same. So the more options we have, the more tools in our toolbox, the more we're going to be able to use different tools or different mechanisms at different times. And the more we can relate to different people, right? Because even our own children may have different styles of how they want to cope with pain, vulnerability, emotions, right? Some kids like to be left alone. Some kids like to talk about it a lot. Some kids are very huggy and needy for comfort and touch, and other kids want their distance a little bit more. So depending on what you're comfortable with, the more of a range that you get comfortable with, the more you'll be able to meet different needs in others and in yourself. So what I always like to say to people is that the things that are hardest for you or most out of your comfort zone, sometimes those things are the places to kind of try to stretch yourself a little bit, because that's where the most healing or transformation can happen. So if your default is to um, well, to try to be self-sufficient, you don't like to depend on others. You like to view yourself as independent. You don't like to take medication. You don't like to take in help from others. You like to do things yourself. You like to be in control. Then learning to lean on other people, to take in from other people, to maybe go to a therapist that doesn't focus as much on helping you use self-help or healing yourself, but actually tries to help you allow yourself to take in help in the actual relationship, could be more helpful for you. If you're the type of person that is more of a dependent person or more someone that really leans on others for emotional support, then learning to do things for yourself that help you can also improve your range. It can give you more options than just using other people who are not always available, maybe, or aren't always available in the way we want them to be. And so increasing our resources of being able to do certain things self-sufficiently or on our own to regulate ourselves can be helpful for that type of a person. So I always encourage people to consider going to a therapist that is able to work with your nature, but also push you out of your comfort zone. If there's a type of coping style that you have and a therapy kind of feeds into that coping style, it might not be the best option for you. So I'll give another example. If you're the type of person that's very intellectualizing and you kind of observe things and are detached emotionally in a certain way, then doing something that's very cognitive for your therapy or your help, or doing something like mindfulness that involves a lot of observing, may for you actually just feed into your default response, and you may not be able to learn something different, like how to get in touch with your emotions, how to be less detached, how to lean in a little bit more to what you're feeling, to your affect, noticing how things are actually really feeling, right? Can be hard for you, and it might get reinforced if you go to a type of therapy that kind of involves techniques that, feed into your tendency to detach or to intellectualize. If you're someone that gets very caught up in venting or seeing yourself as a victim or getting dysregulated, and you go to a therapy that's a lot of just talk, 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 and sort of like venting about your feelings, but you're not really doing anything to change, right? So it might feel good in the moment, but that's just your default response. It might be out of your comfort zone to maybe try something, focus more on behavioral change or changing your belief system, your cognitions, something a little more proactive as opposed to just using the relationship as like a holding environment, which is very useful, but it could be, if it's used to an extreme, right, then it might be preventing you from changing, right, or improving, or stepping out of your comfort zone in ways that might serve you better. So those are just a couple thoughts about how to choose a type of therapy, how to reflect a little bit on your own emotional coping style, your own style for dealing with things that make you anxious, how aware you are of maybe things that have hurt you in the past, or things that you're needing, and how to deal with them. Any type of therapy could be used defensively, right? Could be used to reinforce our patterns that maybe we've already taken to an extreme. And any type of therapy can also be used to help us, right? Kind of do something different. But sometimes it might be good to try something that's a little different from what you're used to in terms of learning a new style of emotion regulation or how to cope and stuff like that. So I hope this was helpful, and I welcome any feedback or questions, and I hope this helps you reflect a little bit on some of the pros and cons of different styles, some which are more focused on attachment and the relationship with others, and other approaches that maybe are a little more focused on your relationship with yourself or what you're doing in your own mind or behaviors to try to help yourself.